Okay, welcome everybody. I posted something yesterday on Facebook and it got some interesting responses. The quote was, "To change ourselves effectively, we first need to change our perceptions." And I like that, and to me it made sense right off the bat, but for other people it was a bit confusing because they didn't think about it in the way I did. Now the Dharma could do a much better job than I'm going to do today, so if you have time to read the seven volumes, you will learn a lot. I thought about the Heart Sutra, and there's one line in there: form, sensation, perception, volition, and consciousness. And those are the five skandhas, the five aggregates that make a human being. So the Buddha, in his wisdom, never referred to a human as simply one thing because it's misleading. We are many things in process, always changing. Nothing is fixed. And then when I thought about the word perception, I thought about the doors of perception, Aldous Huxley, and the time he took mescaline. Now, that can create altered states of consciousness, but life creates altered states of consciousness as well. So, to break down the five aggregates in a simple way, we have the first one is form, and that would take into account our eyes and our ears and our nose and our body and our feet and our hands. Anything that's considered to be form would go into that category. Then we have sensation, perception, volition, and consciousness. Now the kind of consciousness they're talking about is a raw, everyday, always there kind of consciousness. It's not the kind of consciousness that you get when you go into surgery and go unconscious. It's something that's available to us while we sleep. We have sleeping consciousness, we have waking consciousness. And it is the blackboard, if you will, that everything is written on. So we have sensation. The Buddha said there are three kinds of sensation: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. If we have a pleasant or unpleasant sensation, it stimulates our consciousness. It stimulates that blackboard. And it says something is going on. Something good is going on, or something not so good is going on. So now we need to name it. We need to understand what it is. We need to find the reference points. And this is where it gets interesting for me, because I think there's a dance that goes on between conception and preception. We have the concept and and then we perceive it. We conceive it and we perceive it. Or do we perceive it and then conceive it? Does it come through our doors and stimulate our experience and education so we can name it, understand it on page 34 of the last book that we read? Or do we understand it simply because it has stimulated our sense doors, and there's an intuitive knowing about what has been perceived? There's a story in Buddhism about somebody that goes outside and sees a hose, a water hose, and misconceives it, misperceives it, perceives it to be a snake, perceives it to be a threat. So either you kill it or you run like heck. If the sun was out and you saw the water hose, you'd realize it wasn't a threat and that it had a function. And so perception, conception, if we perceived the water hose and didn't know what a water hose was, could we even see it? Would it register anything other than a non-straight line in the reality of non-straight lines? When I was into archery, they said if you lose your arrow, if you miss the target, just look for something that's straight in nature, because there's nothing straight in nature. Everything is curved or angular. So it took us a while to get the concept of water hose and snake, and then the perception, because it wasn't clear, gave us a choice. And some chose fear, and some chose familiarity. Okay. So, if we are to change ourselves effectively, how do we do that? And it seems to me that it's through education, and it's through experience. So experience is changing ourselves from the outside in. Education is changing ourselves from the inside out. Now, I occasionally go to the museum. It's quiet. There's some really fun things to look at and think about. And I rarely ask anybody to go with me, because most people know what they're looking at, as opposed to me, who was just looking. And they're more than happy to share with me all their knowledge about what I'm looking at. And I can see it go from mystery to interesting to simply a bunch of concepts. And then after the explanation is finished, I can't see what I was looking at all. Because all I see now are the concepts of what I'm looking at, and not the thing itself. If I travel, do I read something about where I'm going, or do I go there and then read about it? Do I want the direct experience of it before I understand it, or do I want to understand it before I experience it? It's a conflict. It creates tension. How do I want to live my life? Do I want to live my life from the inside out or the outside in? And Zen would say, perhaps, that, it's better to live your life from the outside in. That all the concepts that you've acquired throughout the years you've been alive are simply fingers pointing, but never the thing itself. And so as I look around Koreatown, I see all the concepts that have been created by my experience and my education that allows me to see Koreatown in my own personal, unique way. But there is no Koreatown, and there never has been. If one were to say, okay, where is the heart of Koreatown? Where is the essence of Koreatown? Where is the soul of Koreatown? We would say it doesn't exist. It's not in one building or one place or one street corner. It's the total concept of people and places coming together and creating a story. Okay. For 12 years I was at UCLA, and people would ask me, where is UCLA? And I would say, I'm not sure. Because what part of UCLA is the essence? Administration, the classrooms. So, in trying to change ourselves from the inside out, it would require us to gather new concepts about what we've been looking at for all these years, and now there's a paradigm clash. We have the new concepts, and we have the old concepts and experience, and eventually the new concepts will negate, take over, be the standard of our experience now. So what comes to mind, because I'm an old guy, and I see some other fairly old guys here, we had, back in the 60s, we had a women's movement, which was amazing. It really changed the way we perceived and conceived women. We also had riots and a way of looking at black people and white people and seeing separation and segregation. And John F. Kennedy said, no, we're going to change the narrative. We're going to now look at it as we're all together on this earth. Unique but connected. So the new paradigm arose slowly, and a lot of people fought the new paradigm. and it's still in process, and it is still changing. And if you watched the Oscars the other night, it reminded me a lot of the 60s. It's just amazing how far we've come and yet how far we haven't come in a lot of different ways. So that's the outside being affected by the inside, the education and the concepts we have about what we're experiencing. But now we come to experience directly, oftentimes in Zen, our present moment reality, and what we find is simply sensation. We find sensation of the eye and the ear and the nose and the tongue and touch, and it's a stimulation, and it's coming through our sense doors, and it's just raw information that has not been edited yet and formed into the narrative of our life. It's simply our present moment experience, and it happens in a flash. And then we just overlay it with concept after concept after concepts, and now we know what we're looking at, and now we know what we're experiencing, and now we understand. And there it is. So does it form us, or do we form it? Does it make us who we are, or do we make it what we are? And I'd have to say there's a give and take that goes on. It's sometimes we are not strong enough to stand apart, and we are created by the conditions we find ourselves in. So people say, what would you do in an earthquake? And we would have concepts of what we would do, and some of them would be heroic. And then the earthquake happens, and we cry like little babies and run for our lives. And we say, how could that have happened? I had pre-planned what I was going to do, and it all fell apart because of fear and dread and wow. And other times we can go into situations and be so focused and so self-assured that we create the situation ourselves. If you've ever heard of a really good speaker get on the stage, he mesmerizes the audience and takes them with him on the journey. Pretty amazing. The audience doesn't create him, he creates the audience. So, in order to change ourselves, we need to have direct experience, and we need to have education. We need to stimulate the intellect. We need to be able to name things. We need at least 10,000 words so we can add those to our experience. Now, can we experience things through the media? I've thought about this a lot as I go on Facebook and post my little postings and cat pictures. You know, and it seems that the only direct experience we have of the media is eyes and a screen. That everything, the eyes come in contact with the screen, and everything else happens inside. It manifests because of consciousness. And I'm going, whoa, you know? So I could sit at my screen for 5 hours and work on a book or work on postings or work on something, and my whole experience for those 5 hours would be eyes on screen, stimulating my brain in this marvelous hallucination called understanding or perception or conception. So how does that fit into the 5 aggregates? Well, we've got the form. So we have the form of the eye hitting the form of the screen. It stimulates us. We have pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That happens with sensation. It stimulates the consciousness. Then we have perception, which is the naming, the understanding of what we're experiencing. And then we have volition. Now, volition is also known as sankharas, and it seems to be the habit patterns that arise when we react to something. So we could be reacting to the screen because we appreciate it or don't appreciate it, like it or don't like it. And our volition would be like or dislike, or delete, depending on how it affected us. If we're thirsty and we see a bottle of water, our volition would be to go and pick up the water and drink the water to quench our thirst. And yet the concepts that went in And the personal experience that went into picking up that bottle and drinking from it is just amazing. Years of building layer after layer of concepts so we can unscrew the cap and drink the water. That's why robots aren't up to snuff yet. Wonderful PBS thing on robots, you know? And the humans are so complicated, their brains are so complicated, we don't even understand how they work yet, completely. So the robots can do simple tasks. We can do simple tasks, but we always make it complicated, because that's how the mind works. Life never gets more simple, it always gets more complicated. And then we die. In a very complicated way. So it seems to me that in order to change ourselves, we need to change the way we experience the world. And that's what Buddhism does. Buddhism says, I can show you how to change your world. I can show you how to change the way you experience your world. And you will always be the only one who experiences your world the way you do. So we start with the 5 precepts. We start with the foundation of morality that gives us a basis to work from. We go into meditation, which is the cultivation of mind, changing our mind. In order to change the world, we have to change our mind. Is the world mind created? Some would say yes. That everything that happens out there is only happening in here. It's an illusion of separateness that gives us the idea that it's happening out there. And then we come to the wisdom aspect, which perhaps is the most important, because these are the keys to our prison. These are the keys that will unlock the prison door and allow us to be free. And the first wisdom aspect is everything is always changing. Even our perception of things change, because our body ages. So I go from single vision to double vision, to bifocals to trifocals. My sense door, my eye sense door, it gets weaker and weaker. My hearing gets weaker and weaker. When I was young, I could hear things happening way over there. When I'm middle-aged, I can hear things that are happening right here. In old age, I read lips. Our sense doors are changing, our conceptions are changing, and we're always evolving. And the secret, I suppose, is to evolve in a good way rather than in a bad way. Or, as the Buddhist would say, I want to evolve in a skillful way rather than an unskillful way. So impermanence is our friend and it is our enemy. It's our enemy because we attach to the good and have aversion towards the bad. And the bad never changes fast enough, and the good changes too fast. Then we come to suffering. The world is filled with suffering. The world is suffering because we have attachment and aversion, because we have craving, we have a thirst that can never be quenched. And in order to be free, we need to understand suffering. And it takes a while to get to that place where you can see the true nature of existence, which is filled with suffering because we attach and want it to be permanent, and it never is, and therefore we suffer, and we wish things could be different than they are, and we pray and we pay, and they always aren't perfect, never perfect. And some people wait for God to help, some people wait for the Dharma to help, and the only help you're ever going to get is what comes from the inside, not what comes from the outside, according to early Buddhism. And finally, the most profound wisdom aspect, the key that opens the most doors to our prison, is the fact that we do not exist in the way we think we do. We are not independent. We are not unconditional. We are always conditional, and we will always depend on everything around us for our existence, our survival, our experience. when we come to the place of either transcendence or non-dependence on self, then we have come to the place of freedom. And people are always curious, what kind of freedom are you talking about? And the Buddha only talked about one kind of freedom in his entire life, and that was the freedom from suffering. That is coming to a profound acceptance of the way things are, seeing the perfection in every moment, not wanting to change it, not attaching to it, not having aversion to it, simply allowing it to unfold and manifest moment by moment. And we're in the flow and going down the river. And the river has no beginning, and the river has no end. And when this body finally decides to lay down and rest for eternity, the next body arises. And that stream of consciousness that I will call karma goes from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime, until ultimately we're free from suffering in nirvana, and then we rest for eternity, because nirvana is unborn and undying. We'll never have to suffer again. But most people prefer to suffer, because the other side of suffering is pleasure. And most people are willing to put up with the suffering to have the pleasure. It's putting up with the happiness or the sadness so they can have the happiness. And it's a tough sell. And until you come to that place where you no longer have attachment to what's going on in the world, you aren't ready. So the Buddha took a two-pronged approach. Number one, why we suffer. Number two, how to end our suffering. And he spent a lot of time on how and why we suffer, because that gives us the inspiration and the persistence necessary, the virya, spiritual energy, to break free from the shackles of samsara, the round of birth and death. So I'm not going to sell you on it, and I'm not going to ask for hands to go up who wants to be free today, because there's a lot of good stuff we want to do today before we become free. But that's my take on perception and conception and the 5 aggregates. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add, or questions they'd like to ask, or perspectives they'd like to share? Seeing as we're all unique and different. Nam, how about you? You have a smile on your face.
Well, this is a very good subject to talk about. Perception. This is in the Buddhist way. And thank you for again to refresh my information for my knowledge about perception. That's all I...
Okay, thank you. Speechless. I like it.
Well, I tried to, because I don't know if you any question much about that.
Perfect. That's wonderful.
I like.
Yes.
Last night I saw a movie about it's walking in. It's about a guy who became famous in 1974, crossing the Twin Tower by cable, walking.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Very good.
On like a tightrope, balancing.
Exactly.
Between the Twin Towers.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So in the moment, I really feel the movie, because and I was very good. I feel it. So the guy was ready to cross. I was submerged in fear, like probably more than the same person, you know. Even I was a specter. How we confront the dead? How we confront that? How we confront in perception itself? How we confront the moment of death, that somebody is pointing a gun on us, and we have the desire, not the desire, but the desire to go forward and not return. The desire to this guy who go forward, and didn't care if he was gonna die. He was just for the heck of the art, for the heck of desire to do something different, for the heck to perceive something like he was feeling inside, and he walked ahead. How we perceive, how we confront the dead, how we confront the moment of the dead, and the time that we don't know if we're gonna die or we don't, but we are uncertain. How we confront in perception that moment?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I haven't died yet, at least that I can remember. So I think the first thing we need to do is we need to practice meditation. We need to practice dying into the present moment. And what we're doing for 10 minutes or 20 minutes is we're letting go of everything we're going to do, want to do, or supposed to do. And death is just letting go of everything forever, not for 20 minutes. So how does it feel to let go of those things? You know, how does it feel to let go of not answering the phone or looking at your smartphone or posting on Facebook or answering the phone or doing the laundry or cleaning the room? How does it feel not to do that? Even if you have this urgency that it needs to be done and this is the moment you need to do it, how do you let go of that? And that would be similar in a very, very small and insignificant way to how it feels to let go of everything forever. I think number two might be the most important part is you have to ask yourself, who's afraid to die? When you look at yourself and you say, okay, what part of me is afraid to die? And you look at your hand and you say, hand, are you afraid to die? And you know what? The hand is fearless. It's not afraid to die because it doesn't know it's alive. And then you ask the other hand, another fearless hand. And then you look at your feet. Feet, are you afraid to die? No problem. Legs, are you afraid to die? Ready to go. Arms, how are you doing today? Anytime's fine with me. So you work your way through your whole body and you find that no part of your body is afraid to die. And then you come to consciousness. What part of your consciousness is afraid to die? Is it your sight that's afraid to die? Is it your hearing that's afraid to die? Is it smelling or tasting that's afraid to die? No. Ego. The thing that doesn't even exist independently. Simply a process because you have a mind and a body. It is afraid to die. Its whole job is to keep you alive. It's done that since the beginning. It's taking you towards pleasure and away from pain. It's educated itself through school and parents and circumstances and careers. What's the best way to continue to exist? And even in the last moment of life, it fights. It fights because it knows it will not exist if the body dies. And it will do everything. And you always hear about people fighting at the end. And I'm always saying, what are they fighting? What are they fighting? It's the ego fighting its non-existence. Every time we meditate, we're making the ego a little more transparent. We're making it more of a servant and less of a master. If your ego is the master at the end, it'll be very uncomfortable death. If your ego is your servant at the end, you will ask your servant to accept death, as it is inevitable. It cannot be fought. There is never a winner. Even the Buddha had to die. But to get to that place takes years and years of Dharma and reflection and meditation. The samurai warriors in Japan, who could kill without blinking an eye. There's an old story of a Zen monk in a small village in Japan, and this samurai warrior had lost his way and now would go into villages and take all the money and take all the women. He had a lot of men following him, and they go into the little Zen dome, the little Zen temple, and there is the master sitting there. And he looks up and then he looks down. And the samurai warrior says, "Don't you know who I am? I can kill you without blinking an eye." And he says, "I can be killed without blinking an eye." And at that point, the samurai warrior bowed and left the little Zen temple because he had met the master. But to get to that point, it's a lifetime, if not many lifetimes. But there is a way to die skillfully. And when you come to that place in your life when you can die skillfully, that's the point where you start to live skillfully in a fearless, courageous way, benefiting all those around you, including yourself. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody is just...
Thank you, Reverend Kusala.
Thank you, Reverend Shanti.
And we got to chant